Hello, hello, my friends. Lincoln said he wanted to come on and share some beginner backpacking tips with you. Um, no, I'm just kidding. He's just saying hi, and now he is going to go sleep because that's what he does most of the time. All right, so last week I posted an article all about 15 beginner backpacking mistakes that new backpackers tend to make. And I just wanted to talk through some of the things that I mentioned and some of the most important mistakes to avoid when you go backpacking. So I did introduce in that blog post my story. And so I'll start off by sharing that a little bit here. So my first backpacking trip was to Half Dome. And I remember I had just been asked by my friend if I wanted to go, and I had no idea, what Half Dome was, and I didn't own any backpacking gear, but he gave me this list, and I went to REI and just wandered around for hours trying to grab some things on the list that I thought I needed, and things that were on his list, I was like, oh, well, I don't need that. I have something that would replace it or whatnot. And asking the REI people hey, what do I get for this? I bought a new backpack. I mean, that was one of the smart things I did is I went there and I got a backpack and I got fitted there. So I did have a backpack that fit. But I definitely got things, I didn't do much research in advance. I didn't know what kind of things were worth investing in and what wasn't worth investing in. So I ended up with a lot of extra stuff that maybe I didn't need, and then not investing in lighter things when I thought I already had something similar, like jackets and stuff. So I ended up with a 45-pound bag to Half Dome, which is very heavy. And it was a very, very slow backpacking trip. I think, so we did Half Dome. You can do Half Dome in a day, but we backpacked it. So we went to Little Yosemite Valley first, and then from there left our heavy packs and then summited Half Dome the second day and back down and slept, and then came all the way back down the third day. So we did a 3-day Half Dome, and it was actually really neat. But a lot of people do day hike it, and I have actually been back now, actually in 2018. So I was getting my years mixed up. In 2018, me and my friend did Little Yosemite Valley all the way to Tuolumne. And we decided to tag on Half Dome since we were able to get permits. And oh my gosh, I hiked it so much faster. It just made me smile, doing it again, thinking oh wow, this is where I had my first backpacking trip, and remembering how slow and how painful it was. And I was oh my gosh, I'm never going to be a fast backpacker, but you get better. So let me just run through some of the favorite tips that I went through in that blog post real quickly here and expand on them a little bit more. And then head over to that blog post. It's on shedreamsofalpine.com if you want to read the whole thing. So the first tip we talked about was packing too much gear, which I've kind of already mentioned. So a big mistake that I made was packing way too many clothes. I didn't know, I didn't own anything. I didn't own the right kind of clothes, and which is essential. There are lighter down jackets that you can own that help significantly keep you warm and reduce your pack weight, and you don't have to pack multiples of things. So I was packing multiple fleece jackets and sweaters. I had no idea what to wear, and I also packed clothes for every single day and morning and evening wear because I was just thinking, oh, well, I'll want to change a whole bunch. But now I pretty much keep it simple. I have what I'm wearing and maybe one extra shirt and some jackets and clean underwear. But I keep it very minimal now for what I pack, especially for just 3 to 5 day backpacking trips. If it were longer, I don't know, I probably wouldn't pack that much more. I'd probably just intend to wash my clothes every now and then. So my biggest piece of advice is anytime you pack, weigh your backpack with your water filled up before you even hit the trails. So then you at least know, and then you can decide what you're going to leave behind instead of doing it on the fly. The second tip that I wanted to point out is when you're a beginner, sometimes you'll plan out tackling on too many miles and not even considering how much elevation gain you have. So I recommend most beginners stick to around 7 to 9 miles per day when they're first starting out backpacking. But I mean, that could change depending on how much elevation gain you have, because some trails are really intense, like the Half Dome hike, I think has about, if you did it in one day from the base all the way to the summit of Half Dome, it's maybe about 6,500 feet of total gain. I forget exactly how many miles off the top of my head right now, but it's a lot of gain. So if you know you're going to have that much gain and you're brand new, you might want to consider maybe paring your days down more to less mileage over that gain if you can. It's just something you need to think about holistically when you're planning. Like, don't just plan miles, also think about your elevation gain. So, and also keep in mind that your pace, especially starting out, and if you're going uphill, is going to be around like 1.5 to 2.5 miles per hour until you get a little faster. So it's going to be a slower day. The third thing I wanted to mention was not knowing basic navigation skills. And this is something actually I've surprisingly run into a lot of backpackers that don't know how to use a GPS at all. They never plan, they never bring one. They don't even bring a phone app. So I just feel like if you want to be a responsible person, you want to be self-sufficient, you really need to start getting in the habit of knowing how to use a GPS. Even if just starting out, like maybe you can't afford a handheld one, just start getting used to using a phone app because they make really affordable ones. Like the Gaia GPS is really nice. You need to start learning how to know where you are, so if you ever get lost, you know how to get out of there. Or if things go wrong and you need to take an alternative route, or you find yourself off track, you can navigate back to where you were. It's really smart to have some basic navigational skills under your belt. I'll give you a few examples. So when I hiked Mount Langley by myself, I went to the top of this pass, and I did have my GPS with me. So I went up to the top of New Army Pass, and things were fine. The trail was really easy. But then from that point to the summit, the trail is a little bit more choose your own adventure, sort of. It's just go to the summit. I mean, there's a little bit of direction, and I do have a blog post on that post in particular. There's some cairns that you eventually want to follow, but it's not like super well defined, like you can't see it very well. So anyways, I went towards the summit, and on my solo trip, I didn't end up summiting Langley that day because there was too much snow and I hadn't brought any snow gear with me. So I decided to turn around halfway. But then on my way back, I couldn't find the entrance to the pass. So at the top of Langley, it's all rock. And if you're ever familiar with the Sierras, it's just like a bunch of loose random rocks everywhere, and they all look the same. And that's what this looked like. And I knew that there was drop-offs, but I didn't remember where the switchbacks were where I could go down. And so I was sort of panicking because I was like, I can't find it. And there were some little cairns, but they are the same color as all the other rocks, so it's really hard to pick out. But fortunately for me, I had marked it the top of the pass on my GPS. And so on your GPS, it just looks like a line. If I hadn't marked specifically, put a flag on the top of the pass, it could have been a long time for me to find it. But I was able to quickly find where the entrance to the switchbacks were because I had a flag on the top of my GPS where that path was. So, and then another peak that we recently did this year was called Split Mountain, or last year I did it with a friend. And that trail, we already knew this in advance. But if I had not brought a GPS, we would have lost ourselves off the trail like at least 10 times because the trail just completely disappears. Like, it's not a very used trail. And we ran into several backpackers that were like, yeah, we lost a trail and then we ended up in this gutter and we were bushwhacking the whole time. But because me and my friend had a GPS and we were constantly tracking ourselves, we're like, already had preloaded somebody else's tracks. And so we were able to be like, well, we're on the right path. And then we would find the trail again. And then we would continue on, and then it was easier. But then we would lose it. And then thankfully the GPS always was able to steer us back in the right direction. So I highly recommend starting to learn some basic GPS and navigational skills. So let's see. I'm going to not go through all of these because there were at least 15 of them. But another one that is really important is making sure you don't test your gear for the first time on the trail. You might not have new shoes, or you might have new water filters, or maybe you bought a new backpacking stove, and you definitely don't want to be testing it for the first time on the trail. You want to make sure you know how to use all of those things beforehand. And sometimes that means because you might find out you need something that you didn't bring because you hadn't tested that piece of gear before. So, like, for instance, recently I just bought a inReach Mini, or last summer I bought an inReach Mini, which is a SOS satellite device, and I tested it like 20 times at home before I ever hit the trails. And I'm really glad I did, because I was like, oh, this is simple, but I was doing something wrong, so I was actually never getting any messages to my friends, and it took some troubleshooting for me to finally figure it out. So always test your gear, any new gear, even if you're not a beginner backpacker. Good grief. Another big mistake that many backpackers do, and I still struggle with this sometimes, is bringing too much or too little food. Something that I've learned about myself over the years is that I always tend to overpack food. So you think, oh, I'm burning so many calories that I'm going to be ravenous. So you're wanting to pack, maybe you eat like 15 to 1700 calories a day normally, and you're like, well, I'm going to pack like 3000 calories a day. But for me, I find that I actually don't eat that many more calories on the trail. I'm not saying that's always the best practice, but I'm usually at altitude and that makes me less hungry. So I'm actually usually eating, and you're walking the whole time, so you're not just like sitting there eating a whole bunch of things. I find that I eat less. I eat around 15 to 2000 calories a day. So that's what I usually pack. Like, I don't pack 3000 calories a day. And I used to actually pack an extra day's worth of food, because I used to be really concerned. I'm like, well, what if something goes wrong and I need an extra day's worth of food, like we get lost or something like that. I used to be very conservative and packed an extra day. But the more I backpack, the more I realize, like, I always have leftover food, even packing only 15 to 2000 calories a day. I always have at least 1 to 2 days. It seems like I could survive 1 to 2 days more off the leftover food that I have after a backpacking trip. So, I mean, everybody's a little different. So you're going to have to do a little bit of trial and error for that. But I'm just telling you what works for me. Another important thing is don't pack too many sweet foods. I know it's really easy to grab bars and candy bars and stuff like that, but trust me, you'll get sick of sweet. And actually, I usually end up craving salty things. So I like to pack like chips, or Trader Joe's has these like Spud Krispies that are pretty delicious, and like roasted nuts and stuff. I also like olives and cheese. I also like tortillas, because when you're at altitude and your stomach feels a little sick, but you know you need calories, tortillas are like plain. They just like, you can just eat them whenever you're like, okay, I can't eat anything else, but I can eat tortillas. So I do like tortillas, and I like to have broth and stuff at night, like miso soup or ramen, stuff like that. Also, you guys, like, going out as a beginner backpacker and not being aware of your basic common leave no trace principles is just not being responsible at all. So you've got to learn the rules ahead of time. You've got to know what you're doing, because you're going to see people on the trail camping right by a lake or doing something they're not supposed to, and you've got to take a stand and be like, I'm going to do it the right way, and I'm going to be responsible for the environment, and I'm going to take on that responsibility myself, even if others are not doing it. So that's really important. And the final thing I can say is also, when you're starting out, try not to do it on your own, because you're going to learn a lot from other people. Try to find a mentor, whether it's online or, on a hiking group or somebody you can learn from. I owe a lot of what I've learned and the ways that I've grown to mentors that have come into my life. So I definitely recommend finding a mentor. And there's so many different avenues these days to learn about backpacking, find mentors, and find hiking partners. So that's something I definitely recommend. So that's it. That's all I'm going to say for today. Definitely go check out the posts. There were 15. I only mentioned a few here. You can find that at shedreamsofalpine.com. And if you have a fun story, you can share it below. There was also some fun ones that were shared on my Instagram. I asked people if they had a funny story from when they first started backpacking. I guess to wrap it all up, I want to say we're going to all make mistakes. You can't avoid mistakes. Like, I still make them to this day, and I'm still kind of learning what works for me. It's all part of just the process, but there are definitely some things that you can avoid by reading this post and being a little bit ahead of the game. So I hope that was helpful, and I hope you guys have a great week. Okay, goodbye.